Saudia flight tragedy. August 31st, 1980. At Riyadh International Airport, Saudia Flight 163 is getting ready to take off, heading to Jeddah. On board are 287 passengers and 14 crew members. The plane is a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, one of the most advanced planes of its time. 7:06 p.m. Takeoff. The plane lifts off from the airport's southern runway. Everything goes smoothly, the weather is clear, and visibility is excellent. The flight is supposed to last just over an hour. No one suspects that the countdown has already started. 2 minutes after takeoff, a fire alarm goes off in the cockpit. It's coming from the rear of the plane, the area where the cargo hold is located. Captain Mohammed Hamid Suhaimi contacts the controller and requests permission to return to Riyadh. The controller gives the green light. The crew begins turning the plane around. At 7:20 p.m., the plane lands safely. But, and this is the most mysterious and tragic part of the story, the crew doesn't stop the plane right away. Instead, it keeps taxiing along the runway and taxiway for over 3 minutes before coming to a stop at the far end of the runway. Over the intercom, the crew announces that they're waiting for emergency services to arrive. However, by that time, the fire is already spreading through the cabin. By the time rescuers reach the plane, nearly 3 more minutes pass before anyone manages to enter the cabin. In that short time, a nightmare unfolds inside. The doors remain closed, oxygen burns out quickly, and thick smoke fills the cabin. No one leaves the plane, not a single passenger or crew member. 7:36 p.m. When emergency personnel finally gain access, they find all 301 people dead. Many are still seated. There are very few burned bodies, most died from suffocation. The plane itself isn't destroyed, but inside everything has been scorched. It was later discovered that the fire had started in the rear section of the plane, likely due to an electrical short circuit or equipment overheating. Clarabelle Lansing incident. April 28, 1988, Boeing 737, 95 people on board, 1:25 p.m., takeoff from Hilo. This was supposed to be just a regular quick flight between the islands of the Hawaiian archipelago. The captain of the plane is Robert Schornstein. The plane climbs to about 24,000 feet, just over 7,000 meters. At 2:02 p.m, suddenly there's a loud bang, kinda like an explosion. A part of the roof on top of the plane literally rips off. In a split second, a huge hole forms, and part of the cabin, including seats and some of the interior panels, gets sucked out. You can see the open sky right through the hole in the ceiling. The entire front upper section of the fuselage is torn apart with a nearly 6-meter long gap. Instantly, the cabin begins to decompress. Air rushes out at an insane speed. One of the flight attendants, Michelle Honda, was standing in the aisle at the time. She loses her balance but somehow manages to hang on. However, her colleague, flight attendant Clarabelle Lansing, who was standing near the first row of seats, gets sucked right out through the hole in the fuselage. The pilots make a split-second decision, immediately descend and head for the nearest airport. The plane is hit by intense winds, deafening noise, and some passengers lose their hearing. Oxygen masks drop from the ceiling, but due to the damage, not everyone gets one. In 13 minutes, they descend to an altitude where people can breathe without masks and steer the plane toward an emergency landing. At 2:15 p.m, the pilots manage to land the plane at Kahului Airport on Maui. Despite the massive hole in the fuselage, damaged wings, torn panels, and the nearly completely destroyed front section of the cabin, they pull off a perfect landing. The only victim of the tragedy was flight attendant Clarabelle Lansing, who was thrown out of the plane. Her body was never found. 65 people sustained various injuries. The Aloha Airlines Flight 243 disaster became a turning point in aviation standards for handling planes with high flight cycles. After this incident, aviation regulators re-evaluated the protocols for technical inspections and metal fatigue diagnostics. Disaster over Lockerbie. December 21, 1988. A Boeing 747 was carrying 259 people on board. At 6:25 p.m, Pan Am Flight 103 took off from Heathrow Airport heading to New York. It was a festive December evening, just 4 days before Christmas. The plane was overcrowded, students, families, and business people. The captain was James McQuarrie, an experienced pilot with thousands of flight hours. 6:56 p.m. The plane was cruising at 31,000 feet, about 9,450 meters, over southern Scotland. The flight was smooth and passengers were relaxed. At this point in the cockpit, everything was routine: reports, monitoring instruments, communication with air traffic controllers. 2 minutes later, without warning or distress signals, an explosion tears through the plane's fuselage. It originated in the forward cargo hold in container AVE 4041PA, which contained a radioactive timer connected to plastic explosives. The detonation instantly devastates the front section of the fuselage. The cockpit is ripped away, and within seconds, the entire front of the plane disintegrates in mid-air. The remaining fragments of the plane, the tail section, wings, engines, begin free-falling. Some passengers in the rear, likely surviving for a brief moment after the explosion, soon faced the plane disintegrating in mid-air due to aerodynamic forces. Debris and bodies rained down on the town of Lockerbie, directly onto homes, roads, and schools. The central fuel tank explodes upon impact with the ground, destroying 3 homes and killing 11 local residents. It was later revealed that the bomb was placed in a suitcase at Malta Airport, which made a transfer in Frankfurt, wasn't inspected, and ended up in the baggage of Pan Am 103. The disaster claimed the lives of all 259 people on board and 11 on the ground. Pan Am, both as an airline and as a company, never fully recovered from this blow. A few years later, it went bankrupt. The Andes tragedy. October 13, 1972, a Fairchild FH227D. On board, 45 people, including rugby players and their coaches. 1 p.m., takeoff from Montevideo. Flight 571 departs the Montevideo airport, heading for Santiago. It's a regular flight carrying rugby players, their coaches, and several crew members. The weather that day was overcast, but not too bad for flying. No one knew this flight would turn into a nightmare for everyone on board. 2 p.m. The plane is flying over the high Andes Mountains. The crew tries to navigate through worsening weather, but poor visibility and dense cloud cover begin to complicate things. Around this time, the plane starts drifting off course. A short while later, all communication with the plane is lost. That was the first warning sign, but no one noticed it right away. 15 minutes later, the plane suddenly loses control and crashes into a mountain. A terrifying impact. Complete disaster. 12 people die instantly from the crash and the collision with the rocky terrain. After the crash, the survivors find themselves stranded in an almost unreachable location, high up in the mountains. Temperatures drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius and even lower. They have no shelter, and over the next few days, they struggle against the freezing cold, hunger, and growing illness. With no access to food or water, their strength begins to fade and people start to lose hope. In the first few days, many passengers die from the freezing cold as they have no protection from the harsh conditions. Even those who survived the crash can't keep warm. There's nothing among the wreckage that could help them fight off the cold. Days later, when all their food and water supplies run out, the survivors are faced with an unthinkable decision. To stay alive, they must eat the bodies of those who didn't make it. It was a brutal and mentally devastating choice, but under those extreme conditions, it was the only way to survive. After nearly a week, the survivors realize that no help is coming. Despite the horrific conditions, they decide to set out in search of rescue. A few members of the group decide to venture on, hoping to find assistance in the nearest settlements. On October 29th, while the survivors were sleeping, an avalanche descended from the mountains to the valley where the wreckage of Flight 571 lay. 8 more people died. For 3 days, the living were trapped under snow along with the bodies of the deceased, confined in the tight space of the plane's remains. It wasn't until 72 days later, after the survivors had traveled nearly 50 kilometers through the mountains, that they encountered a rescue team. Miraculously, they were found alive. 16 of the 45 people on board the plane survived and were rescued.